The Mercer estate sat on the edge of a mountain in West Vancouver, where the pines gathered like guardians and the Pacific wind arrived coated in salt and distance. Locals called it the glass citadel, half home, half fortress, its walls built as much from silence as from wood, stone, and wealth. From the terrace, the view fell endlessly toward Burrard Inlet, and beyond that, the quiet silver of the sea. Nothing disturbed the order of that house. Nothing out of place lasted long. Nothing until she appeared. Her name was Ana Lavoie. She arrived on a Tuesday, carrying everything she owned in a small weathered suitcase, her shoulders straight despite the weight of a life that had clearly not given her much. She came from Quebec, with no family listed, no references beyond the agency, and no explanation for why she had traveled nearly 4,800 kilometers to work as a housemaid. Her resume was short, her voice even shorter, and yet she got the job. Most people lasted only weeks under Ethan Mercer. He was not a cruel man, but neither was he gentle. He was exact, brilliant, a strategist wearing the skin of a CEO, owner of Mercer Developments, one of the biggest construction firms in Western Canada. He was the kind of man who didn't waste words, the kind whose presence changed the gravity of a room, the kind who learned early in life never to believe what people showed on the surface, because surface was the easiest thing to lie with. He didn't trust easily. He barely trusted at all. And he trusted least the people who seemed too good. From the moment she stepped into the house, Ana behaved with precision, fast, disciplined, invisible like breath on glass. She moved quietly down hallways, learned the layout in a day, remembered staff names in 2, and figured out which china set Mrs. Rowan, the head housekeeper, reserved for formal dining, without ever being told. Her rhythm resembled grace, but had no vanity. Her work was spotless, but never loud. She did not hover. She did not seek approval. She simply worked too well. House staff whispered about her in the pantry when they thought she wasn't listening. "She starts before everyone," said Claire, the sous chef. "She finished polishing the silver in half the time," said Bennett, the old chauffeur. "She doesn't accept tips," Rowan noted one morning, her tone unreadable. That last part bothered people the most. When Mr. Bennett, out of habit, tried to slip her a folded bill after she helped him carry groceries, she gently put it back in his pocket and said, "Merci, but I can't." When Claire tried, Ana smiled and shook her head. When Mrs. Rowan tried, Ana looked genuinely grateful and still refused. Refusing money is not something people do in a house like the Mercers, which made it suspicious. Everything unusual was suspicious, especially to Ethan. He first saw her not in person, but through one of his security camera feeds, the ones hidden behind wall frames and recessed lights. She was polishing the banister of the grand staircase, her blonde hair braided neatly, her fingers wrapped in soft gloves to avoid leaving a trace of oil on the wood. She paused only once to straighten the frame on the wall that wasn't crooked at all. "Strange," Ethan said under his breath. "What is?" asked Marcus Hill, his longtime assistant. "She didn't have to fix that frame," Ethan replied. Still watching. "Nobody would notice but her." Marcus shrugged. "Isn't that a good thing?" Ethan didn't answer. He had long ago stopped believing in pure motivations. He preferred motives he could measure, control, outcomes, leverage. But simple sincerity, that didn't exist. Not unless it had a purpose. After years of empire building, Ethan had acquired more enemies than friends. He learned to study people, and Ana Lavoie was now a person worth studying. For the first week, he didn't speak to her. He observed, quietly, always from a distance. When he passed her in the hall, she stepped aside with the reflex of someone who had been taught not to take space. That wasn't given. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear, musical in a distant way, as if she came from somewhere both colder and kinder than here. But she never revealed anything about herself. When other staff shared stories from childhood or complained about long shifts, she just listened and smiled. Even laughter, when it left her, felt guarded, like it had traveled a long way before being allowed into the light. Who lived like that? Who trained themselves to be seen as little as possible? Ethan didn't miss how she avoided mirrors, looking only long enough to make sure her uniform was neat. He noticed how she favored her left leg slightly when climbing stairs. as though hiding an old injury. He noticed how she always took the smaller serving at dinner, even when she was clearly hungry, and he noticed most of all that she never reacted to kindness. Praise slid off her like rain off stone. Suspicious. Late one evening, Ethan returned from a meeting downtown. The house was quiet, staff gone for the night except for one light still on in the foyer. He paused before stepping inside and saw her through the glass door. Ana was on her knees, scrubbing a faint scuff from the marble tile. No supervisor was present. No cameras watched her from this angle. She didn't know anyone could see her. Yet she worked as if it mattered, as if the work itself were reason enough to do it well. Ethan watched her for a full minute, then another. Then he finally walked in. "Why are you still working?" She startled, not with fear, just surprise. Slowly she rose to her feet, wiping her hands on her apron. "There was something left undone," she said simply. "It's past your hours." She nodded. "I know. Then why do it?" The question seemed to puzzle her. "Because it's the right thing to do." He stared at her for a long moment. Something about her struck him as dangerous, not because she was a threat, but because she might be exactly what she seemed. And that was the biggest danger of all. Ethan stepped closer. Not menacing, not warm, just precise. "No one is watching." Ana double quotes, her eyes met his blue like frost beneath sunlight. "Someone always is," she said softly. It was a simple reply, but it burrowed under his guard and stayed there. He said nothing more. He left. That night Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in his office with city lights flickering on the horizon and reviewed everything he had learned about her so far. It wasn't enough. He didn't understand her yet. And what he didn't understand he couldn't trust. So he decided on one thing. Before he allowed Ana Lavoie to stay in his house any longer, he would test her, not casually, not gently, but completely. He would learn who she truly was, not the polished version, not the quiet servant, but the real woman beneath the silence. And if she had a secret, he would find it. He always did. The decision came to Ethan late at night, cut cleanly from the sleepless dark like a polished stone from ice. He had tried to ignore the question pressing against his thoughts: who is Ana Lavoie really? But he could not. He didn't believe in coincidences, and he believed even less in people who had goodness behind silence. People like that either carried saints' hearts or perfect lies, and Ethan Mercer did not believe in saints. So he prepared a test, not the childish kind. This would be elegant, subtle, the kind of trap that didn't look like a trap at all. By mid-afternoon the next day, the living room of the Mercer estate looked deceptively casual. A plaid cashmere blanket hung over the sofa arm. A half-finished espresso sat on the side table. A book lay open upside down as if someone had been reading and left the page unfinished. But the centerpiece of the stage sat upon the walnut coffee table, a wallet casually left open, a watch worth more than a car, and a stack of Canadian $100 bills restrained only by a gold clip. Enough temptation to quicken the pulse of anyone who believed fate finally smiled on them. Enough to reveal character. Ethan stood at the fireplace for a moment, surveying the scene, considering every angle like a director before a final take. He didn't want to catch Ana checking the items everyone noticed: money. He didn't even want to catch her wanting them. Want was human. What he needed to see was choice. And choices, real ones, only appear when no one is watching. So Ethan made sure she would believe no one was. He lay on the sofa, loosened the top button of his shirt, and let his head rest against the cushion. He angled his arm over the edge as if caught in an accidental nap. He closed his eyes. He slowed his breathing. He became still, behind a framed painting across the room hidden so deeply into architecture that even the staff could not find it. Sat a micro-security camera with a direct feed to Ethan's office. It would capture everything, every look, every hesitation, every decision. He wasn't nervous. He told himself he wanted only clarity, and clarity had never frightened him. But his heart beat once, a little too heavy, and he ignored it. The grandfather clock struck to 47 p.m., right on time. The faint rhythm of footsteps approached, soft, consistent. It had to be her. No other staff moved like that, quiet but present, like someone who didn't want to exist in space and yet couldn't help belonging to it. The footsteps paused at the doorway. For a long moment, nothing happened. She was watching the room, reading it, Then she entered. He felt the shift in air as she moved, a soft presence, scented faintly of lemon soap and cold mountain air. She walked close enough that he could feel a trace of her warmth near him. She stopped again. She saw the money. He didn't move. He listened for her choice. There was a stillness that lasted just long enough to say she noticed. Then she stepped away. No rush, no panic. She didn't even glance at him again. She simply began cleaning. He expected her to work while keeping the money in sight, to hover near it like someone holding a secret. But she didn't. She turned her back on it entirely. She cleaned the lower bookshelf, dusted the windowsill, straightened books that weren't crooked. She was either the most disciplined thief he had ever seen, or completely untouched by temptation. He felt something tighten unexpectedly in his chest. Minutes passed, then a pause. Ana remained facing away from the table, but her shoulders lifted with a breath that did not quite belong to routine. A thought moved through her, the kind that changes the air before it changes a life. Slowly, with purpose, she walked back to the coffee table. Ethan's heartbeat found a sharper rhythm. This was it. Would she touch the watch? Slide a single bill into her apron? Pretend innocence? Her hand reached forward, but instead of taking anything, she picked up a book from the side table. She placed it over the money and wallet, as if tucking temptation out of sight. He frowned beneath closed eyes. What was that? Not self-defense. She wasn't afraid of being accused, not guilt. She hadn't done anything wrong. No, she covered the money out of consideration, as if she believed no one, including him, should leave something so risky lying around. She wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting someone else. The thought unsettled him. Then she did something he was certain he had not predicted. She looked at him, not to check if he was awake, not to see if anyone was watching, but to notice him. Just notice, as if he were not the master of the house, but simply a man asleep after a long day. She left the money and walked away, not out of the room, but out of instinct, toward the hallway bench where a folded throw blanket rested. She returned, and carefully, gently, she placed it over him, tucking it as though warmth was something that should never be wasted. He didn't understand, and he understood too well. He had not expected kindness, not thoughtfulness without an audience, not tenderness in a house that forgot it needed any. He almost opened his eyes, almost spoke, but he didn't, because she wasn't done yet. She hesitated. One heartbeat, then lifted a hand and brushed an unruly strand of hair from his forehead. The touch was barely there, so light he could have convinced himself he imagined it. But he didn't imagine what came next. A soft whisper so quiet it trembled before it reached the air. "Thank you for giving me this job. I won't let you down." Then she was gone, and Ethan Mercer lay there, shattered by something that didn't break anything, but rearranged everything. He waited until the room felt still again. Then he opened his eyes. The money was untouched. The watch was untouched, but he was not untouched. And for a dangerously long moment, he didn't know what to do with that. Ana Lavoie had just passed a test he hadn't realized he hoped she would fail, because if she failed, the world stayed predictable, orderly, brutal, safe, but she did in single quotes T. And now everything felt uncertain. He sat up slowly, staring at the book she had used to cover the money. Les Miserables, a story of a convict redeemed by a single act of compassion he did not deserve. He closed the book thoughtfully. Compassion. No. He refused the word. Compassion had motives. Compassion had angles. Compassion was something people weaponized to get ahead. What she had done, he didn't have a word for it. And that made it infinitely more dangerous. He stood, gripping the edge of the table. This wasn't over. He still didn't know who Ana Lavoie really was, but he knew one thing now. He needed to find out, no matter what it cost him. And for the first time in years, he was afraid. By morning, Ethan had convinced himself he had imagined it. That moment in the living room, the covered money, the blanket, the words whispered so close they lingered on his skin, felt unreal in daylight. The kind of moment memory knows how to soften or twist until it becomes convenient, rational. But the footage proved it had happened exactly as he remembered. And that was the problem. He watched the recording again, not to study her hands, not to catch her eyes sliding toward the money, but to understand what had moved inside her, the why behind her choices. People didn't do that. People didn't hide someone else's temptation. They hid their own, unless. His jaw tightened. Unless she had been tempted like that before. Temptation leaves a mark. He'd seen it in business: new partners who spoke too softly, investors who smiled too easily. He trusted hunger more than kindness. At least hunger was honest. But her eyes had not held hunger when she saw the money. They held something worse, something cleaner, a burden that unsettled him most of all. He shut the monitor off and stood, bracing his hands on the desk. Clarity wasn't coming, and so he did what he always did. He studied. He would watch her, track her, learn her, not because he was obsessed, because he refused to be manipulated again. He found her first in the hallway, kneeling to adjust a runner rug. Her attention narrowed as if the fibers themselves mattered. She checked alignment not with a ruler, but with instinct, as though order was something she owed the world. Her hair was pulled back in its usual braid, but today a loose strand fell across her cheek. She didn't seem to notice. "Morning, Miss Lavoie," Marcus said, passing her with a binder in hand. "Good morning," she answered without standing. She didn't try to impress people, didn't fill silence, didn't ask unnecessary questions. That alone made her a mystery. Later, in the garage camera feed, she appeared again, just a quiet figure carrying a folded blanket. She walked to the far bay, where Mr. Bennett, the chauffeur, sat in the driver's seat of the old Rolls-Royce, head slumped slightly forward. Asleep, Ana opened the car door carefully, so carefully that the wind didn't change around her. She tucked the blanket over his lap like someone who had practiced the act 1,000 times, then gently adjusted it around his shoulders. Ethan stared. There it was again, that useless kindness. The kind people reserve not for others but for the world, for life itself. "Strange girl," he murmured, watching the monitor. He zoomed closer. Something small slipped from her pocket as she stood and fell to the floor of the car bay. She froze, picked it up quickly, turned her back to the camera. What was that? He leaned in. A tiny embroidered handkerchief, the same one she used earlier to wrap a cracked teacup, the same one he had seen tucked into her apron. White fabric, crooked thread, a simple 4-petal flower stitched in the corner. He waited for her to put it away. Instead, she held it a moment longer, as if making a decision. Then she pressed her thumb against the center of the flower and closed her eyes. As if it was prayer or pain. He didn't know which. By lunchtime, the house was moving. Again, glasses clinking faintly from the kitchen, a cart rolling across the floor, the gardener humming outside. Ana was in the main study now, wiping the window trim. The room was quiet, sunlight and tall bookshelves. He watched her from the doorway. She didn't notice him, not at first. She was lost in rhythm, one hand following the cloth, her thoughts somewhere far beyond the glass. She worked methodically, but not mindlessly. She moved with the precision of someone who found purpose in small things. Ethan stepped inside. "You're left-handed," he said. She paused, surprised by the voice and even more by the fact that he was addressing her. "Sometimes," she said. "Is that possible?" She hesitated. "It depends on what life asks." He studied her. "And what did life ask of you?" A shadow crossed her face, a slow, unguarded flicker before the quiet returned. "To learn how to use both hands," she said, and went back to work. Ethan had heard confessions disguised as simple sentences before. That was one of them. He didn't push further. "You missed a spot," he said, though she hadn't. She reached up, her hand stopped before the glass, and she smiled a little. "You were testing me," she said. He blinked. She didn't sound offended, just tired. Not in her body, in her soul. He said nothing. She returned to cleaning, and he left before the silence revealed more than he wanted to hear. That night, he found her outside. The storm had not yet come, but the wind had begun gathering its voice. She stood at the far end of the terrace alone, looking down at the dark stretch of forest rolling into the sea. Her arms wrapped around herself, not for warmth, but for protection from something without a name. He stayed in the doorway, watching. She took out her phone, stared at the screen, hesitated, and put it away again. She pressed a hand to her chest, and for a moment she thought no one saw. She broke. Not loudly, not fully, just a silent breaking, the kind only strong people know, the kind that happens without sound. Her shoulders shook once. She inhaled slowly, found control, pulled the door of emotion closed again, locked it. Then she wiped her cheek with the back of her wrist and went back inside. No witness, no weakness, not if she could help it. But she had been wrong. Someone saw, and that someone, standing very still in the doorway, felt something he had not let himself feel in a long time. Concern. For a woman he didn't trust, didn't understand, couldn't ignore. The next morning, in the kitchen, Ana found a small envelope under her teacup. No name, no message. Inside, money, the exact amount she had refused the staff the past weeks plus a little more. And one line written on the envelope in precise handwriting: do not refuse. Consider it advance salary. She looked around. No one claimed it. She held the envelope as if it weighed more than paper should. Then she closed her eyes just once and whispered, barely audible, "Mercy," on the second floor landing, unseen. Ethan watched her walk away. He had meant to restore balance, but instead, he had crossed a line. He hadn't just tested her anymore. Now he was involved. The game had changed, whether he wanted it to or not. The morning of the investor luncheon arrived with the smooth, expensive quiet that West Vancouver seemed designed to protect. Sunlight spilled politely across the Mercer estate, stretching over slate rooftops and evergreen ridges, before slipping through floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, the staff moved with a synchronized grace sharpened by years of service under Ethan Mercer. Invisible, disciplined, Ana Lavoie moved among them, a silent line of calm inside the quiet storm of event preparation. She carried no clipboard, issued no instructions, and yet, tasks seemed to align wherever she passed, as though order followed her like a shadow. She adjusted the angle of a floral arrangement no one had noticed was crooked. She helped the catering assistant discreetly hide a chipped plate before it reached the dining table. She softened the stiffness of the seating layout by pulling one chair an inch closer, preventing awkward loneliness in the flow of conversation. No one asked her to. No one had to. When she finished placing hand-folded linen at the final setting, she lifted her head and caught a reflection in the glass. Ethan Mercer, watching her from across the room. Neither of them moved for a moment. His gaze wasn't cold today. It wasn't warm either. It was something far more dangerous. Curious. Guests arrived one by one, then in clusters. Car doors opened like a rhythm. Laughter drifted up the steps in refined notes. Men wore tailored suits. Women wore neutral elegance and inherited diamonds. Every handshake exchanged was a transaction. Every conversation had a price. And every smile held a quiet warning. Power lives here. Behave accordingly. Ana moved through the grand hall with a tray of champagne flutes, careful not to draw attention and yet unable to avoid it. Beauty, even quiet beauty, was its own form of gravity, noticed whether it meant to be or not. She wore a modest black dress beneath a fitted serving jacket. Her hair was braided neatly again, her features calm and unreadable. She knew her place. She didn't step outside it, but she didn't shrink either. That, ironically, made her more visible. Mrs. Rowan watched with a protective eye from across the room as Ana stepped between billionaires and board members, threading through the hierarchy of wealth without disturbing it. If grace was a language, Ana spoke it fluently, though she didn't seem to know she did. Near the fireplace, Ethan listened to a briefing from Marcus, but his attention occasionally drifted back to Ana. He didn't want it to. He had always despised distraction, especially when he couldn't quantify. He didn't trust what he couldn't define, and he couldn't define her. Not yet. The break in the day came halfway through the luncheon. Not catastrophe, not scandal. Just a single moment that cut quietly and cleanly through the house. The kind of moment you don't see coming until it's already teaching you something about people. It began in the guest lounge, where a group of influential women had gathered. Among them Eleanor Crestwood, philanthropist by occupation, social strategist by reputation, threat by nature. She was dressed in pale champagne silk, her hair a carefully constructed cascade, her expression polished enough to serve as glass. She held something in her hand, white cloth. A handkerchief, Anna's handkerchief. "Excuse me," Eleanor said with a tone of smooth curiosity, just loud enough for half the room to hear. It seems someone left this behind. Ana froze where she stood with her tray. The embroidered flower for crooked petals was unmistakably hers. She stepped forward. Sorry, that Eleanor smiled, but it was the wrong kind of smile. No need to apologize yet, dear. I'm only questioning. Intention. Conversation in the room slowed. Marcus paused mid-sentence. Even Ethan turned. It was found, Eleanor continued lightly, beneath the chair where one of our married guests was sitting. A little message, perhaps? A calling card? A couple of guests exchanged glances. Others sipped their champagne to avoid appearing involved. Anna's shoulders stiffened not visibly, but enough that Mrs. Rowan, who knew her well enough to see tiny things, felt it like a small quake in the floor. That handkerchief was a gift, Anna said quietly. I must have dropped it. Oh, I'm sure, Eleanor said sweetly. What a delicate little design too, almost intimate. She held it out by the tips of her fingers as if it were contaminated. You don't strike me as the foolish type, so I'll assume you know how this looks. Anna swallowed but stayed silent. She had learned the hard way sometimes explanations did not make people listen. They only made them dig deeper. The silence turned to judgment. She could feel it gathering around her like a slow, rising tide. Here it comes, she thought. Another accusation. Another place I don't belong. Something. In her eyes dimmed, she lowered her head not in guilt but in weary acceptance. And that was the moment Ethan moved, not out of impulse, not out of chivalry, but out of clarity. He reached Eleanor before anyone else could. Mrs. Crestwood, he said gently, I appreciate your concern, but there's nothing to question here. She blinked. It was found under a chair. That chair has been cleaned multiple times today. Items shift. That's not evidence of anything except movement. Her lips thinned. I was only protecting your reputation. He met her gaze evenly. Thank you, but my staff does not leave messages beneath furniture, subtle or otherwise. Subtle heat threaded through his voice. The room felt it. Eleanor lowered the handkerchief, but she didn't let go. What if? She tried again. We're misplacing trust. Ethan leaned in just slightly, voice low enough for only her to hear. The day you know more about character than I do, Eleanor, I'll let you teach me. A silent win. She released the handkerchief. He didn't give it back to Anna right away. Instead, he placed it gently into Rowan's hands. Kindly return it to her things, he said. Anna lifted her head finally and looked at him. Really looked, not at the CEO in front of her, not at the man of reputation, but at a person who had chosen when it mattered, not to stay silent. He didn't smile at her. He didn't nod. He didn't acknowledge the moment, but she felt it. All the same. The luncheon resumed and conversation flowed again, polished and empty. But in the hallway outside the dining room, Anna stood alone, her breathing shallow. She leaned lightly against the wall and closed her eyes. She had survived humiliation before, but this time, something was different. This time someone had stopped it. She heard footsteps approach and didn't need to open her eyes to know who it was. You handled that well, Ethan said. I didn't do anything. You didn't defend yourself. Some people hear only what they want. Do you always let people think the worst? She finally looked at him. Her voice didn't tremble, but it carried something far heavier than fear. When you've been accused enough times, Mr. Mercer, you learn to stop explaining. Guilt is easier to believe than truth. He studied her face a long moment. And are you guilty? No, she said simply. Then why not fight back? A pause. Because I'm tired. Something moved in his expression, just slightly. And then for the first time since she met him, his voice softened. Go take a break, he said. Half order, half kindness. She nodded. Then left before he could see the shimmer in her eyes. And Ethan stood in the quiet hall and wondered when had her pain started to feel like something. He could feel, too. The rain arrived before dusk, first as a hush against the glass, then as a certainty. It gathered itself in the pines, shook loose in silver ropes, and hurled the hillside into a watercolor of green and slate. By 6, the sky had lowered to the eaves, and the inlet went dark as poured ink. Inside the Mercer house, light held its ground until it didn't. The power dipped once, like a heartbeat missing a beat, dipped again. Then the chandeliers sighed out. A second later, the generator thudded alive and brought back a narrow spine of electricity. Hallway sconces, security, a few emergency circuits in the service wing. The rest of the house softened into shadow. Ethan stood at his office window and watched rain stitch the world into a single, moving fabric. Storms always steadied him, systems laid bare. Noise reduced to the elements. Tonight, it did the opposite. He kept seeing a handkerchief in Eleanor Crestwood's fingers, the tilt of Anna's chin, the tired truth in her voice, "Because I'm tired." It was a simple sentence that had carried the weight of years. He left the office without a jacket and took the back stairs down, listening to the subtle rearrangement of the house under storm, vents breathing, timbers settling, water looking for places to belong. In the kitchen corridor, the emergency light drew a warm amber square over tile. The big kitchen, usually bright with stainless gleam, was a dusk of outlines. He registered the scent first, lemon soap and rain. Then he saw her. Ana stood at the far window, a dish towel pressed against a new hairline crack spidering through the pane. Wind drove rain at an angle that found the flaw and threaded it inward. Her braid was loose, her serving jacket damp at the shoulders where she'd leaned into the leak. She hadn't heard him approach. The storm had given her cover to be human. "Leave it," he said. She startled and turned. In the low light, her eyes reflected more than they usually allowed: fatigue, stubbornness, a private grief that refused dramatics. "If I leave it, the counter will flood," she said, matter of fact. "Then the floors. I'll have maintenance handle it in the morning. It's happening now." The answer was not defiance. It was duty. He felt the smallest flare of respect light in him again. The same uninvited kind that had followed him since the living room test. He shrugged off his suit jacket without thinking and crossed the room. "Here," he said. He draped it over her shoulders. The fabric looked wrong on her, too sharp for her softness, yet right in a way that unsettled him. She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. The rain found a heavier rhythm on the glass. The generator hummed like a distant animal. "Come," he said, and gestured toward the service kitchen. It was the only room with a steady light amber. Practical, small. He held the door, and she hesitated only as long as it took to decide whether stepping into a smaller space with her employer constituted risk. Then she stepped through. The service kitchen smelled like flour and coffee. Pans hung obediently. A single kettle sat on the stove, orphaned from flame. He flicked the emergency burner. It ticked and caught. "Tea?" he asked, already reaching for mugs. "You don't have to, I'm aware." A ghost of a smile touched her mouth, then left as if it didn't want to intrude. He poured water and waited for steam to turn into invitation. The storm pressed the walls gently, a giant hand steadying the house. For the first time since the generator had kicked in, the quiet felt earned rather than forced. "You stayed," he said, not looking at her. "After the luncheon." "I work here," she answered. "You could have left." "I could have," she agreed. "Why didn't you?" She looked down at his jacket around her shoulders, at the threadbare cuffs of her own blouse, at the heat ghosting from the kettle's spout. When she finally spoke, it was as if the words had come from a long way off and almost didn't survive the distance. "Because places need people," she said. "Houses pretend they don't, but they do, especially during storms." He set a mug in front of her and leaned back against the counter, arms folded, not as a barrier but as a way to keep from reaching toward something he didn't know how to hold. "This house has had storms before," he said. "It survived." "That's not the same thing," she said. "Surviving is what walls do. Being lived in is different." He studied her a moment. The emergency light warmed her skin, softened the angles of tiredness. She looked both younger and older than she was. He recognized that paradox. He wore it, too. "You didn't defend yourself," he said, returning to the place his mind kept circling. "With Eleanor." "I did," she said gently. "I didn't break." "That's not what I meant." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "People hear what confirms them. If I had argued, I would have looked guilty. If I had cried, I would have looked manipulative. If I had laughed, I would have looked careless. I chose none, chose silence, chose work," she corrected. "Silence is a byproduct." He nodded. The rain lifted and fell again, testing its own edges. "You said once that explaining makes people think you have something to sell. It's true in every language I've tried." He wanted to ask how many languages that was. How many places? How many rooms like this, with different men across a counter and different storms pressing windows? Instead, he let the question pass. He didn't want her history as information. He wanted, what? Understanding, permission. He wasn't practiced at wanting anything that didn't lead to a contract. My father hired a maid when I was 9, he said, and surprised himself with the confession. She read to me when I was sick. When she left, the safe was empty. I learned that kindness has invoices you don't see until they're due. I'm sorry, Ana said. It taught me to be precise. He lifted the mug and looked into its steam as if the truth might be written there. I tested you, I know. He glanced up, caught by the calm of that response. How? You put temptation in the middle of a room and pretended to sleep nearby, she said, as if describing a weather pattern. People who want to be wrong are careless. People who want others to be wrong are careful. Which was I? She lifted the mug and took a sip, buying herself the dignity of a pause. Careful, she said, but also curious. It wasn't accusation. It wasn't absolution either. It was a naming. He found, to his own surprise, that he could breathe better after it. You covered the money, he said. Why? Because someone might come in who needed it more than I didn't, she answered. And because leaving temptation in the open is unkind. To whom? To anyone who is trying to be better than their hunger today. He watched her then. Really watched her, the steadiness that wasn't rigid, the softness that wasn't weak. He thought of all the systems he managed. How many? Relied on contingency and leverage, on moving pieces into positions where their choices were predictable. She did not move like a piece. She moved like a person. A gust pushed rain hard against the window. The glass shivered and held. She flinched, hardly more than a breath, and then her hands released the mug, just enough to keep the heat from marking her palms. He noticed the faint impression of old tape along the inside of her elbow. Ghost lines that familiarity could miss, but experience couldn't. The thought of a nursing home and a missing cross, of blood given and trust revoked, passed between them without words. Why are you still here, Ana? He asked softly. She looked up. The question had too many rooms inside it. She chose one. Because if I leave every place that misunderstands me, she said, I won't have anywhere left to stand. Then, after a beat lower, and because you asked me to stay. He had, not with words, perhaps, but with the calculus of the luncheon, with an intervention that cost him social capital he pretended not to count. He felt the strange mix of pride and remorse that followed any decent act done late. Will you always stay? He asked. No, she said, and the honesty was oddly kind. Storms end. They let the quiet sit with them. The kettle hissed itself empty. The generator's hum steadied into background. Somewhere in the main kitchen, a cooling tray ticked as metal surrendered heat. He set his mug down and stepped closer without quite deciding to. She didn't move back. Her eyes held his, wary only of being misread. He lifted a hand and, after a small hesitation that honored the distance between two lives, he touched a damp strand of hair near her temple and tucked it behind her ear. His fingertips brushed the line where rain had dried and heat lived beneath. It wasn't a claim. It wasn't a promise. It was a first. Fragile yes to the existence of softness in a house built to keep softness out. She did not close her eyes. She didn't need to. She let the moment be exactly the size it was and no larger. Then she placed the mug in the sink and straightened his jacket at her shoulders. Like a flag acknowledging wind. You should rest, she said, voice steady again. So should you. I will. After I tape the window. Let me, it's my storm, she said, and almost smiled. I found it. He almost smiled back. Then we'll fix it, he said. Together, they left the service kitchen and walked the short hall shoulder to shoulder. Not touching, the space between them different than it had been when they entered. At the window, she held the towel while he pressed the tape, their hands moving with the choreography of people who had learned, separately, to rely on themselves and were relearning. Slowly, the geometry of two, when it held, she stepped back, and he did too. The rain kept speaking its old language against the glass. Inside, two quiet answers had been given, neither loud, neither final, both real. The generator hummed. The house breathed. The storm stayed. And something else finer, more dangerous began. The night of the Mercer Foundation Charity Gala arrived draped in gold and expectation. The mansion, usually a study in cold perfection, had been transformed into something warmer, almost alive. Lanterns lined the garden path like fallen stars. Violins drifted into the night air. Guests arrived wrapped in elegance and ambition. Cameras flashed at the entrance as luxury cars rolled into the driveway like a royal procession. Inside, the ballroom pulsed with sophisticated light and silent judgments. Conversations sparkled with compliments that meant nothing. Deals were made beneath chandeliers. Wealth moved from hand to hand disguised as generosity, and in the center of it all, moving calmly, gracefully, effortlessly, was Ana Lavoie. She did not belong there. Not by society's measure, not by bloodlines or wealth. Yet tonight, she did not carry a serving tray. She did not wear a maid's apron. Tonight, she wore a dress. It was simple, midnight blue, sleeveless, falling gently to her ankles. Her hair was no longer braided, it fell loose, soft against her shoulders, like moonlight released from captivity. She wore no diamonds, no gold, only a single silver ribbon at her wrist, modest, quiet, striking. She looked like a secret the world had not earned the right to hear. The staff had insisted she attend, just this once. Ana, Mrs. Rowan had said, no tray, no uniform. Breathe. She still wasn't sure why she had agreed. She had told herself she came to help quiet logistics, behind the scenes, but she knew that was a lie. She came because somewhere along the way, without permission or logic, gravity had shifted for her, and its center was Ethan Mercer. He had not seen her arrive, but when he did, the moment he did, everything in him paused. He stood at the far end of the ballroom speaking with a government official when his gaze drifted, unintentionally, toward the staircase. And there she was, just standing there, holding nothing, speaking to no one yet, somehow pulling the entire room into orbit around her. Something inside him moved painfully, like the first breath after being underwater for too long. He excused himself from the conversation. Without realizing he had done it, Ana saw him approaching and straightened slightly, as though preparing for impact. You're here, he said. Her lips curved, not a smile exactly, but the beginning of something. Mrs. Rowan insisted. I'm glad she did. He wasn't a man who wasted words. And tonight, for words were more than enough. The evening unfolded with practiced grandeur, auction boards, pledge cards, champagne poured with silent precision. But beneath it ran something quieter, threads of human truth hidden under silk and applause. Ethan noticed it now, because Ana noticed it, and he was watching her more than he watched anyone else. He watched her pause to speak kindly to the junior caterer who dropped a napkin and turned crimson. He watched her gently guide an elderly donor who struggled with the steps. He watched her step out onto the terrace alone for just a moment, not to escape, but to steady herself, as though beauty and noise were things she needed to measure carefully. She didn't belong there, and yet no one fit more perfectly. The speeches began. Board members spoke of expansion, philanthropy, medicine, structure, money, polite applause, polite smiles. Then the final speaker was announced. Please welcome Mr. Ethan Mercer. He stepped onto the stage, not as a ruler of the room, but as a man who suddenly knew words weren't enough for what needed to be said. And yet he had to speak anyway. Thank you for being here tonight, he began. We often stand in rooms like this and speak about progress towers we're building, foundations we're funding, the future we're shaping. But sometimes it feels, he paused, like we forget who we are building for. A hush moved across the room. Ethan's eyes searched the crowd and found Ana. Real change doesn't start in a room like this, he continued. It starts quietly somewhere no one is watching, in small acts, done not for attention but because they must be done. He did not look away from her. Kindness is not noise, he said. It doesn't announce itself. It lives in silence and small choices, every day. People followed his gaze now, found her, wondered. I've learned something recently, Ethan said. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes dressed as quiet. Sometimes the bravest person in the room is the one who doesn't ask to be seen. Ana froze. He wasn't. He couldn't be. He was talking about her. He wasn't telling her story, but he was acknowledging it, honoring it, protecting it. without exposing a single piece of her soul. He told everyone in the room that integrity had a face even if they didn't know the name. That belonged to it. I won't mention who taught me this, Ethan finished softly, because she wouldn't want the attention. But I hope someday you meet someone like her. And if you do, don't overlook her. People like that change lives. The entire ballroom was still. Ethan stepped away from the microphone and left the stage. He did not go back to his table. He went to her. I didn't know you were planning to speak, Ana said, her voice unsteady. I wasn't, he said, until tonight. Thank you, she whispered. You don't have to thank me. Yes, she said. I do. They stood there not touching but closer than they had ever allowed themselves to be beneath the eyes of the world. Then Ethan reached into his pocket. I wanted to return this to you properly, he said. He opened his hand. In his palm rested a delicate silver pendant shaped like a star. Anna's breath caught. This isn't mine, she said. It was my mother's, Ethan said quietly. She wore it every day. Said stars don't shine because they want to be noticed. They shine because they must, because the world would be darker if they didn't. He placed it gently in her hand. And that reminded you of me? She said softly. No, he said. You reminded me of her. Something broke open inside Ana, not with pain this time, but something frighteningly close to hope. She closed her fingers around the pendant, holding it like something sacred. Like something she had never been trusted with before. Like something no one had ever believed she deserved. Until now. That night, neither of them said what hung between them. They did not name it. Did not rush it. Did not touch. Did not kiss. And yet that moment was more intimate than either had known possible. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was recognition. But the world does not give without asking something in return. And before the night was over, Ana would be forced to choose between the life she was given and the life she still dreamed of. The days after the gala unfolded with the quiet intensity of a storm that had already passed but left the world strangely changed. Something had shifted between Ethan and Ana, an invisible thread drawn tight between them, neither spoken nor acknowledged, but pulsing with an unbreakable truth. They were no longer strangers moving through the same house. They were orbiting each other now, pulled by a gravity neither fully understood and neither dared name. Yet sometimes, just when a heart learns it is safe, life reminds it of old roads still waiting. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Ana was setting fresh linen in the guest corridor when she found a cream envelope neatly placed under her teacup on the service table. There was no sender name, but she already knew. Her hands hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single letter printed on thick stationery, bearing the seal of the Hawthorne School of Nursing, Toronto. Her eyes froze on the first line. We are pleased to inform you that you have been awarded a full scholarship. She read it again. Then again. Full tuition, housing included, monthly stipend, graduate placement guaranteed. Her chest tightened. Her hands trembled. How? There was a second slip of paper inside. Just one line in handwriting she recognized now as easily as her own. Someone believed in you. Now go become who you were meant to be. No name. No signature, but it didn't need one. Her breath caught. It was Ethan, but Ethan had never said a word. Not once, not even a hint. She sank slowly into a chair, letter trembling in her lap. The dream she had buried, the dream she stopped speaking about long before she ever stepped foot inside this house, had come back to life, right here in her hands. But with it came the fear that always followed dreams. The cost. Because choices always collect a price. And she had already given her heart to much violence by leaving places that made her feel seen. Could she do it again? Ethan stood by the window of his office when Ana knocked on the door. Her face was calm, composed, but her eyes carried something he hadn't seen since the night in the emergency kitchen. A storm trying not to be one. Comin', he said. She stepped inside, the envelope in her hand. Why didn't you tell me? It wasn't about me, he said simply. You did this. I opened a door. You'll walk through it if you choose. I don't understand, she whispered. Why? He held her gaze. Because the world shouldn't lose people like you. The room fell silent. Words tried to form on her lips and died before sound. Gratitude, disbelief, fear, hope, everything collided at once. You're leaving. He said softly, not accusing, just acknowledging. She closed her eyes. If I go, it means losing this place. His voice gentled even further. If you stay, you might lose yourself. The truth hurt because it loved her, and she knew it. He stepped back, giving her space. Ana, you don't owe me anything. You don't owe anyone a reason to become who you are. Then after a long beat she asked, barely more than a breath, will you be all right? He had been asked many questions in his life. That one simple, human unraveled him. He didn't lie. I don't know, he said. Ana left 2 weeks later. A quiet departure. No goodbye party. No grand speeches. She packed a single suitcase and folded her uniforms with care before placing them back in the linen room. She left the staff kitchen cleaner than it had ever been. She whispered a soft thank you to Mrs. Rowan and hugged Mr. Bennett like a granddaughter who didn't want a break. But when it came to Ethan, she didn't know how to say goodbye at all. He waited for her at the front gate. No handshakes, no embrace. Just 2 people who had walked through a battle neither spoke of and survived in ways that changed them. This house will always be a place you can return to, he said. She tried to smile, but it trembled. And you? He took a breath. I'll be here. There were 1,000 things she wanted to tell him, 1,000 things he wished he could ask her to stay for. But they both understood the greatest act of love is sometimes letting someone go. She turned to leave. He let her. And for the first time since he was a boy, Ethan Mercer watched something he wanted walk away from him and did nothing to stop it. Because some things can only grow in freedom. 6 months passed. Toronto's snow melted into spring. The sea winds softened over Vancouver. Letters came and went, never often, but always enough. Ana worked through her nursing studies with relentless, quiet determination. She earned the respect of her professors, the trust of her patients, and the friendship of a few who learned her laughter wasn't rare, it was just private. As for Ethan, he was as relentless as ever. He didn't slow down, didn't step back, but the edges of him softened. He spoke differently to people, looked them in the eyes more, stayed longer when listening. The house changed, too. Life had entered it somehow. Light through open windows, fresh flowers in hallways, music occasionally playing in the distance. Mercer Estate had stopped being a fortress. It became lived in, and without meaning to, he began planting lavender, rows of it, soft purple breathing across the hillside behind the estate. He didn't know if he planted it for the house or because of a memory of a girl who once stood alone in a storm and spoke about staying where you're needed. Sometimes he wondered, would she ever come back? And if she did, would he still be here? It was late afternoon when she returned. No announcement, no phone call. Just a quiet arrival in early autumn, 6 months to the day she had left. He didn't hear the gate, didn't hear her steps. He was kneeling in the garden trimming the lavender when he heard a voice behind him, soft, gentle, familiar. You still don't plant in straight lines. He froze, then turned. She stood there, sun behind her, hair longer now, posture still humble but different, stronger. She no longer looked like someone passing through life quietly. She looked like someone who had chosen her place in it. He rose slowly. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. Nothing rushed, nothing spoken. The wind moved between them like a messenger that no longer needed to translate. She stepped closer and held something out to him, a small, wrapped parcel. He opened it. Inside was a handkerchief, white linen, carefully stitched. In the corner, 2 initials sewn in gold thread, E-M-N-A-L. She met his eyes. This time, she didn't look away. I used to leave without saying goodbye, she said. I don't do that anymore. He didn't speak. Couldn't. There were moments for words and moments that were heavier than words. He reached out. She didn't step back. And for the first time, not as master and maid, not as strangers learning trust, but as 2 souls who had finally arrived where they were always meant to. They moved toward each other. No dramatic declarations, no frantic urgency. Just peace meeting peace. He touched her cheek softly, reverently, as if her return was a miracle he did not deserve but would cherish anyway. She leaned into his hand, not because she needed saving, but because she had chosen where to belong. They didn't call it love. They didn't have to. Some stories do not end with a kiss. Some end with something far stronger. A beginning. If this story ever mattered, It was never because of grand speeches, or beautiful houses, or power that moved the world. It mattered because of two people who learned after everything that goodness doesn't need applause. It simply needs courage, and real love is quiet.